welcome members of the public to the Place and Resources Scrutiny Committee of Dorset Council on the 13th of July 2021. Chairman's statement on virtual committee meetings. At the annual meeting of the Council on the 4th of May 2021, it was agreed that all Council meetings that are not executive in nature will continue to be held virtually from the 7th of May 2021 until such a time as social distancing requirements are removed, currently scheduled to be lifted on the 19th of July 2021. Where a decision is required, committee members will express a minded to decision in respect of recommendations set out in officer reports, with decisions being taken under officer delegated authority in the light of minded to decisions expressed by members in the virtual meeting. Any decisions or recommendations required will be confirmed by the appropriate officer at the conclusion of the committee's debate on an agenda item. So if I can move to the agenda now. And I will do a roll call of the committee members. So, Councillor Rod Adkins.
Here, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor John Andrews.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Brian Heatley.
I'm here, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Mike Parks.
Morning, Chair. Present.
Thank you. Councillor Mark Roberts.
Yes, present, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor David Shortell.
Present, correct, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor David Took.
Present, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Bill Trite.
Present, Chairman.
Thank you. And the officers attending the overall agenda are Mr. John Selgren, Executive Director of Place, Mr. Jonathan Mayer, Corporate Director for Legal and Democratic Monitoring Officer, Mr. Jim McManus, Corporate Director for Finance and Commercial, Ms. Lindsay Watson, Senior Democratic Services Officer, Ms. Judy Saunders, Producer for the meeting, and other officers will introduce themselves when they come to report on the agenda. So do I have any apologies?
Yes, Chairman, apologies from Councillor Andy Canning.
Thank you. So as per the Constitution, members, we need to vote in a new Vice Chairman. So could I have a proposer, please?
Yes, Chairman. Councillor John Andrews, I'd like to propose Councillor David Cook.
Thank you. Could I have a seconder, please?
Yes, Chairman, Councillor Mark Roberts. I'm happy to second.
Thank you. If there is no dissent, I'll take that as approved. Thank you, members. So we move on to item 2 on the agenda. Any declarations of interest? If any members have any declarations of interest, if you could declare them now. If there are none, then if anything should come to light during the course of the meeting, could you please declare them then? Thank you. Chairman's update. There is no update. Public participation. Do we have any questions, Ms. Watson, from the public?
No, we've not received any questions from the public.
Thank you. And have we had any questions from members at agenda item 5?
No, no questions from councillors either.
Thank you. So if I move to agenda item 6, review of the Community Infrastructure Levy, SIL, expenditure. We have a recommendation that members of the committee scrutinise the SIL governance arrangements as implemented and invite the Executive Director of Place to recommend any proposed changes to the Overview Committee before Cabinet approval. And I have a presentation by Officer Andrew Galpin, Infrastructure and Delivery Planning Manager. So, Mr. Galpin, would you like to do your presentation, please?
Thank you, Chairman and members of this committee. Good morning. As Councillor Bartlett said, my name is Andrew Galpin. I'm the Infrastructure and Delivery Planning Manager. This item before you today relates to the Community Infrastructure Levy, or SIL. And SIL is a developer contributions tool frequently used by the Planning Service across much of the Dorset Council area. The purpose of the report is to explain how governance arrangements that deal with the allocation and spend of monies collected through this mechanism have been implemented following approval by Dorset Council last year. This post-decision scrutiny serves to ensure the continued delivery of important infrastructure. I recognise that this is the first time an item on SIL has come before this committee. You may be more familiar with the term planning obligations or Section 106 agreements. SIL differs to planning obligations secured by way of legal agreement, insofar as the principle is to support the cumulative impact of development rather than any site-specific needs. There is still a role to play for planning obligations secured through legal agreements, but such use is now restricted to the delivery of affordable housing or prerequisites and in the delivery of major allocated sites. The levy is a charge per square metre of net additional floor space, which creates a new dwelling unit. The charge is established through viability evidence and set through examination by the Planning Inspectorate. In most cases, SIL is set alongside the local plan. SIL charging schedules operate in all predecessor council areas except the former North Dorset area. SIL rates and chargeable uses vary across Dorset Council, and further information about the rates can be found on the Dorset Council website. SIL has been operational in Dorset since Purbeck implemented its schedule in 2014. Since implementation, the charging schedules have collected money to deliver infrastructure necessary to support development. With Dorset Council having formed, consistent arrangements to spend SIL were developed and implemented in 2020. These arrangements took into account reforms to SIL at a national level, which include the removal of a regulation requiring councils to set out in advance what their priorities are for spending SIL money. Until that point, those predecessor councils which introduced SIL had published lists setting out their priorities for spending SIL, and priorities included flood defences, education, transport and biodiversity mitigation. The arrangements deal with legacy categories and provide a platform for identifying new infrastructure challenges and priorities going forward. So a bit more background for you. Regulations underpinning SIL require the income that we receive to be split three ways. There's a proportion to be retained by the collecting authority, which is Dorset Council, and there's a proportion to be transferred to the town or parish council where development takes place. That's 15% or 25% where that receiving town or parish has a neighbour plan that's been adopted. There's also a proportion to recover the cost of implementing and administering the levy, which is at 5%. Dorset Council website provides details of the payments transferred to town and parish councils. In total, this transfer amounts to approximately 1.96 million since 2014. The proportion retained by the collecting authority sits at the heart of the governance arrangements. The arrangements ensure that those existing published infrastructure priorities would be honoured up until the point at which the government regulations change to ensure that infrastructure identified by those legacy councils can be facilitated as far as practicable. Charging area boundaries would limit the spend of money in each area. Section 10 of the report before you sets out how the governance arrangements were implemented. Members and officers were involved in the governance process with key funding decisions coming before Cabinet. 37 projects were awarded approximately £3 million of SIL in January this year. To date, £440,000 has been drawn down. Some of those projects deliver pre-existing commitments with the likes of Natural England and the Environment Agency. Going forward, these commitments need to be retained in order to mitigate the impact of development on protected habitats and flood risk areas respectively. The report looks back on the effectiveness of the first round of SIL spend and identifies some improvements which can improve the efficiency of infrastructure delivery. This includes removing some elements of infrastructure from the scope of the governance arrangements to be managed by bespoke steering and delivery groups already established. With approximately £1.83 million of SIL uncommitted from round one, officers encourage that a second round of SIL spend focuses on this carry forward with the same honoured categories of infrastructure in play. In the meantime, SIL funds collected after the government changes withdrew the requirement to set out published lists will continue to grow and build into more meaningful amounts, allowing flexibility and choice over new infrastructure priorities. Members of this committee are asked to scrutinise the governance arrangements as set out in the report and invite the Executive Director for place to recommend any changes to Overview Committee before Cabinet approval. Thank you. I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gelpin. So, as per normal, members, I'll take questions and anybody who wishes to speak from non-committee members, and then I will move to questions from the committee members and then for a committee debate. So are there any members that wish to speak? I've got no RTS in the chat bar at the moment.
Chair, it's Councillor Gray. I can't get my hand up, so I'm intervening. Sorry. I'd like to speak to the governance. Thank you.
Okay, go ahead, Councillor Gray.
Yeah. Good morning, Andy.
Good morning.
The last time we spoke about this this governance arrangements, I had some concerns about what the fund was called, i.e. Community Infrastructure Levy, and the level of involvement the community had. We had a conversation regarding the 45 projects, and particularly in my area, Weymouth and Portland. It came to light that there had been no meaningful debate or consultation with the community, i.e. the projects that were decided were, and I quote, officer-led with the portfolio holder. Service areas were encouraged to engage with town and parish councils. So we did ascertain at that moment that there had been little or no consultation with communities and very little with town and parish councils. I note in 10.1 and 10.2, it's in the governance arrangements that it says community engagement demonstrated, which clearly under our last conversation it hadn't been, and the officer-led approach and the portfolio holder encouraging service areas, I take it that's departments in the council, to engage with town and parish councils. So my questions were really to the committee and for you to consider, maybe for John to consider, which is there any way that 10.1, 10.2 can be more specific, because it's very open to community engagement demonstrated. You've already said within your 5% that you can, I think I'm right in saying that you could use some of that 5% to consult with the communities, some of that funding. So it's not a funding issue. I wonder whether you would consider effectively beefing up 10.1 and 10.2 so that there is some sort of meaningful contribution from the community, as it's a community levy. I've got a further question, but I'll let either John or Andrew come in, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gray. Mr. Gilpin.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Councillor Gray, for that. I remember we spoke at length on this. I think what I'm trying to explain through 10.1 and 10.2 is that the governance arrangements have things like a scoring matrix, which we use to judge the merits of a proposal that's come forward. And what we ask through, partly through that scrutiny matrix, is for evidence of consultation and engagement with the public. And a lot of projects that we've seen coming through this process from service areas have had some form of community consultation. The Weymouth Gateway project, for example, and the lighting scheme that benefited from SIL funding, has been awarded SIL funding, had some quite substantial public engagement through that. And other projects that we've seen, highway related projects, there's a lot of engagement through the LTP process. So we do scrutinise the level of engagement when we're assessing bids. The challenge we have is finding the right balance. There is only a finite pot of money here, and we have to manage that. We have a duty to manage the way in which the SIL money is used. And what we've done at the moment is focus on strategic and corporate priorities which have the support of the community. I think that the term of community infrastructure levy can be a little bit confusing. It's infrastructure that is there to support the community, to support development. It's not necessarily the community's infrastructure levy. So there's an important role to play for Dorset Council in terms of managing that and ensuring that it serves the corporate priorities and the strategic infrastructure that's necessary to support development. And that's why the report before you today does emphasise the importance of those pre-existing commitments, particularly in the likes of Weymouth Town Centre, where we have flood defences to help fund through SIL. And again, they're priorities for SIL.
Can I come back, Chair?
Yeah, just before you do, Councillor Gray, did you have anything to add, Mr. Selgren?
Thanks, Chairman. If I may, just to add to what Andy said, he's talked about the process quite rightly, which is referred to in the report. I think what I'd add to that, and again, I hope this in part responds to Councillor Gray's question, is we can do some work, I think, up front with the town and parish councils around making them aware of the SIL process and how it operates. Obviously, although it's not new in that sense, it's a newer part of the developer contributions process. So there may be some that perhaps don't have awareness of how it operates. So we've got arrangements in place to do that, to hold regular update briefings and webinars and so on for our town and parish council colleagues, both the clerks and indeed chairs, and where appropriate, wider membership. So I think, Chairman, if it was felt that would be helpful, I noticed Andy nodding in response to that point. I think we can certainly pick that up, and I'm more than happy to have that just written into the minutes to confirm that's another part of the process that we can include to do that awareness raising, which would be something we do ongoing. It's not something we just do once and for all and never again, but that there's a commitment on the part of Dorset Council to keep town and parish councils appraised of the SIL process and how it operates and how they can engage with it. I hope that helps, Chairman.
It does, yeah. I'd written it down actually as possibly part of the recommendation that we would bring to the end of this, and possibly using the comms team of Dorset Council. Thank you. Councillor Gray, you had another question?
Yeah, I'm not too happy with that, I'm afraid. There's two things I'd like to suggest. One is the scoring mechanism is. I take Andy's point about it. This is a strategy in infrastructure, and we can't have a free-for-all, laissez-faire approach. But somehow we have to engage with communities more about what is being spent. The problem with John's suggestion about briefing town and parish councils is that is normally post-event. It's normally already decided. Well, that's not consultation. That's just informing. I'd like much more upfront consultation with both members. If I wasn't going to bring up specific cases, but if you use the Gateway project, Andrew, the one councillor on that project, Dr. John Orrell, actually disagreed with that process, but was overwhelmed by the rest of the people, not with a stakeholder on that. So there are key issues here about either members or communities having a say in not just the strategic projects, but the process. And I'd like to suggest that we review the scoring mechanism, because that's not weighted really in favour of the community. It's weighted heavily in terms of the structure, and also in the review document that Andrew produces in terms of the schemes that go forward, I'd like to see some specifics about how the community was engaged prior to it being decided. I think that would satisfy me. I'm not looking for a free-for-all that we want a pet project, and I understand that the strategic nature of some of the net floor space issues, what that causes is key. I just want the public to feel that they are more communicated with and more consulted with in some of the money that's being spent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Gray. Mr. Gilpin.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, in the report, I have referred to the fact that we've now published some information about how much money has been transferred to town and parish councils. That was off the back of the debate we had earlier in the year about the transparency and openness about that. And looking at the figures there, £213,000 has gone to Weymouth and Portland, sorry, Weymouth Town Council, I should say. So there's a substantial amount of money there that we can work with Weymouth Town Council on, and I think there is scope, as you say, to engage more closely with the Town Council and other parish councils in advance of a funding window. And what we want to do is maximise the usage of that funding. So
I'd be happy with that. I'd be happy with that, Andrew. Thank you.
We can do something with the arrangements, fine tune the arrangements to make that engagement with town and parish councils in advance of a funding window clearer. Again, pointing to the published information that we have about the receipts that they receive, and see what priorities they have for spend, and see how that aligns with projects that are coming forward or emerging through Dorset Council.
Brilliant. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you. Mr. Shelgren, do you have anything to add?
Thanks, Chair. I was going to make the same point that Andrew's just done, which is that we would envisage an upfront process, an upstream process with town and parish councils, and that would be a regular thing ahead of, as Andy says, ahead of funding rounds. And just heard Councillor Gray's response to that. It would seem, I think, that that proposal would address the concern that's been raised.
It would. Thank you.
Okay. Do you have anything else, Councillor Gray?
No, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Points well raised. Thank you for that. So is there any other non-members of the committee from the council that wishes to speak? I've got nothing in the chat bar. So I will move to the committee. So Councillor Mark Roberts.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. More points than questions, I think. The fund is obviously, the proportion of the funds retained by the council will be dropping as more and more neighbourhood plans are approved. Is that taken into account on some of the continuously fund or long-term funding on the projects? But also, I think what John Selgreen said about explanation to towns and parishes, some of my rural small parishes feel that they don't benefit at all from other than the 15 or 25%, depending on their thing. And they feel very constrained by the uses to which that can be put. They feel it's too constricting for a small parish which may not have many features, may not even have a playground, but it still has a fund of money. And they feel that perhaps it should be a little more flexible for very small parishes. And they're concerned that, and it almost emphasised then by John and Andrew saying that Weymouth has collected a large amount, it should therefore go to Weymouth. My understanding is it is collected by Dorset for Dorset, not in Weymouth for Weymouth. And I would appreciate Andrew and John's views on that, please.
Thank you. Mr. Kelpin.
So just to clarify in response to that last point, the regulations require a proportion of CIL to go directly to the town and parish council where development takes place. So the funds I mentioned there for Weymouth Town Council, just over £200,000, is from development within that area to ensure that the benefits of CIL stay local. What members agreed to last year was the charging areas that operate CIL were on a former district and borough basis, and members agreed to spend money collected that is retained by Dorset Council within those areas. So let's say, for instance, money collected and retained by Dorset Council from development in Lyme Regis would be spent anywhere in the former West Dorset area. So the drive from members last year when in putting in place these governance arrangements were to keep the spend local as possible, i.e. the money collected through and retained by Dorset Council, the 85 or 75% element, to be spent in the charging area from which it was collected. But there is no choice over the town and parish council proportion. That automatically goes to the town and parish council where development takes place. On the point about constrained, more and more town and parish councils taking on neighbour plans, that is a fair point. You know, we are seeing a lot of neighbour plans coming forward through Dorset Council. It was done that way to incentivise town neighbour plans coming forward. So we are mindful of these commitments. They are significant commitments, particularly around habitat regulations, and we are mindful of that in planning spend going forward. And that is something that we'll be presenting to members and officers in future about the cost of those commitments.
Yeah, could I come back, Chairman?
Certainly.
So I'm just still struggling with it. If it's going to a region, what area collected for Poole Harbour? That to me, that's a whole Dorset, and I'm struggling a little why, with the funding the NHS gets, we need to contribute towards clinical services at Dorchester Hospital when the communities, particularly the small rural ones, would feel that perhaps enhancing rural bus services in order to get to the hospital would be much more important than adding to the world's third largest employer.
So on that last point, a lot of the charging areas have similar infrastructure priorities. So to fund Poole Harbour through CIL, we are taking proportionate amounts from each area. So one area isn't topping up the other as such. It is providing funding together to deliver that infrastructure. And
sorry, can I ask, is that being matched by BCP?
Yeah. So,
yeah,
I am relieved
about that.
So everything that underpins our habitat regulation commitments, nitrates, heathlands, Poole Harbour recreation, are all underpinned by planning policy and established policy, which sets out how the cost of that mitigation will be recovered through development. And it is partnership with BCP because it's a policy that was prepared together, and all we're doing is simply fulfilling that policy requirement through these governance arrangements. It's effectively honouring those commitments and delivering on those commitments. The point you also made about small parishes receiving money, there is actually greater flexibility for town and parishes to spend their 15 or 25% proportion of SIL. They aren't as constrained on what they use it for. The onus is on them to publish how they spend it. So there is greater flexibility. And when we've transferred funding to town and parish councils, we've supplied that with a note, a guidance note, setting out some of the sort of frequently asked questions that we receive from town and parish councils about what they can do with it. So the simple answer to that question is actually town and parishes can do more with their proportion of SIL and have more greater freedom and flexibility over what they can do with it than Dorset Council. And I'm more than happy to have a conversation offline if you've got any further questions.
Yeah, there's one or two issues where a village doesn't actually look after any sort of green spaces, and that's one of the conditions, and they struggle. The really small parishes sometimes struggle. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Marcus. Point well made, and I do take your point about possibly better bus services to those rural communities and the benefit they could bring those communities. That's a point well made. Mr. Selgren, did you have anything to add to that?
Nothing to add to that, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. If I could now move to Councillor Andrews, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. My question, first question is, why is North Dorset, or the former North Dorset, different than the rest of the county? Because we're supposed to be all one at the moment. I don't understand that point and why they are different. So if you want to answer that one first, that'd be good.
Sure, no problem. Yeah, so North Dorset, so again, the legacy arrangements that we're effectively working through at the moment see those SIL charging schedules and charging areas carried forward by Dorset Council. All of the former districts within Dorset Council had prepared a SIL charging schedule, effectively a rate of charges. All bar North Dorset had got through to the stage of adopting and implementing their charging schedules. North Dorset had examined their charging schedule, but decided at the time not to implement and adopt the charging schedule. That was largely because of the rates were regarded as quite low and it wasn't seen as good value for money. And obviously the advent of Dorset Council put that decision on hold. What we're going to do to resolve that is that we are working in parallel with the joint local plan on a single charging schedule for Dorset Council. The two processes, i.e. SIL and the local plan, are very much embedded with one another because the viability of development and the cost of infrastructure is fundamental to the delivery of the plan. So we are working on a revised single charging schedule covering the whole of Dorset Council to include North Dorset alongside the development of the local plan, and the intention is to adopt that single charging schedule alongside the new local plan. In the meantime, we're not saying that we don't collect infrastructure in North Dorset. That's absolutely not the case. We just simply revert back to a largely Section 106 led process where we secure contributions through legal agreement for development there.
Thank you, Andrew. That explains that perfectly. Second one is 15 or 25%, depending on whether you, and I know that was done to incentivise, but it actually makes people, almost tries to force people into having a neighbourhood plan when one is not required. So I don't think that's a fair policy. I don't think incentivising us or anybody to do a neighbourhood plan is the right thing to do, because neighbourhood plans, as I've seen in area planning committees, once they're 2 or 3 years old, they become null and void anyway, because they seem to be thrown out the window when decisions are made, etc. So I can't see the reason why a neighbourhood plan, very expensive and time consuming the situation, especially for our planning department, is something to incentivise. So and we've got actually the new local plan coming out, which everybody's had their input into. So I think that's vastly unfair. So I do commend the upfront consultation that John Selgren has mentioned, which is a good thing, because I had similar thoughts as David Gray did, that it was a reporting mechanism rather than a consultation. I would like to think that the 70 or 80% of the contribution of SIL that is collected and spent by Dorset Council is spent in the community that it was collected from, which, as we've seen recently in the footpath in Sherborne, that's needed to be done because it was so inept, the old footpath that was built in the 60s, late 60s. The Sherborne Town Council used their SIL money. So a bit like the Channel Tunnel, it was 95% done, but they didn't have the funds. Dorset Council apparently didn't have the funds to complete the footpath, but it needed to be completed. So Sherborne Town Council used their SIL money, or some of the SIL money that they were given, to top up that fund to complete that footpath. But there are major infrastructure situations going on in Sherborne. The SIL money collected from the area should be used on, and it seems as though there's a funding problem when there was a huge amount of 106 money put in, and it didn't get, well, that hasn't been used yet, but the SIL money added to it would quite easily pay for the big infrastructure issue that we have in Sherborne, which has already been planned, but we don't know if we've got the funds for it yet. So so that's a question.
Mr. Gilpin. I'll come to Mr. Selgren.
Okay, yeah, just to say that we are mindful of the availability of Section 106 funding as well. You're right that there is a fairly substantial amount of Section 106 funding retained by Dorset Council at the moment from Barton Farm development. Yeah. And when we do look at projects, we do look at the availability of unring-fenced Section 106 funding. Because SIL has come on board, the way in which we collect for Section 106 is now different. Back gone are the days where we used to collect Section 106 and have very little prescription over how it's used. These days, Section 106 is specific to a prerequisite on a development site, a junction improvement or some off-site improvement. So we have very little room for manoeuvre on that, but in some cases we do, and we do look at those balances to see where we can maximise the potential of both developer contribution sources.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Selgren.
Joe, I just want to make sure we were just very clear about the language and terminology around town and parish councils. It's a process what we described as one of engagement with, so that we give them clear advice, information about how the SIL system operates, so that they can engage and participate in that process effectively.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And I think going back to Councillor Gray's point on that, I think it's the town and parish councils that are probably best placed to really go out in their community and really get engaged with their communities to what their communities want, which I know is quite a concern of Councillor Gray, if I understand it correctly. Okay. Okay, if I move to Councillor Heatley.
Thank you, Chair. Can I start by saying I very much support Councillor Gray's point, and I hope that we can get to some resolution on that. The question I want to ask is, how far does in aggregate, the connection of the community infrastructure levy meet the ostensible purpose for which it's levied? That is to say, meets the cumulative effects, cost of the cumulative effects of development. Now, I mean, I can understand how you can make reasonable predictions, probably on a square metre basis, for things like schools and hospitals and how much money needs to go to them. There are going to be particular things for each development that are relevant, maybe around transport, etc. But this is the process that is being described here doesn't seem to be terribly well connected to that overall demand. And I wonder how far, both in terms of quantity, are we getting enough community infrastructure levy to pay for the infrastructure effects of development, and qualitatively, is it going to the places that those developments are creating demands for infrastructure, or are we in fact running off and doing a whole load of other infrastructure wishes that we want to deal with? What's the balance overall in a quantitative sense? Is it doing the job?
Skelpin.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think the term we use to describe planning obligations secured through Section 106 or the Community Infrastructure Levy is developer contributions. They are a contribution to the delivery of infrastructure. They always have been. The government recognised that the tools that we have at our disposal weren't working effectively together, and the reforms that I have alluded to in the report help smooth the relationship between Section 106 and CIL. At one point, we weren't allowed to use Section 106 alongside collecting CIL because there was a perception that we are taking funding twice for potentially the same piece of infrastructure, and it was unfair on development. The government have relaxed that now, so we can, and we do, try and strike a balance between using Section 106 to deliver infrastructure necessary to make development acceptable in planning terms, i.e. junction improvements or a school or a community facility, and secure that through a legal deed. The CIL is on top to effectively collect funding from smaller developments by and large, but the cumulative impact, it won't deliver everything that we need, and that is plain and simple. But you look at an example in Weymouth Town Centre where we have significant flooding costs in the tens of millions for flood defences. This is a contribution towards that infrastructure. It's a sign demonstrating to our partner organisations that Dorset Council is committing what it can within the confines of viability. And I think viability is at the point in your question that dictates what we can do with the levy, how much we can secure and how much we can contribute towards infrastructure. But what we're doing with these tools is showing that Dorset Council is taking the delivery of infrastructure seriously, and it stands us in a better place to match fund that developer contributions funding with central government funding or other sources of funding as and when they arise. So that's a really important reason why a lot of councils in this country have taken on CIL, because it's seen as an additional measure to secure additional funding where needed.
Okay, and I'm in no sense saying we shouldn't do this. It seems to me it's a great idea. But I mean, could you hazard a guess at roughly what proportion of the infrastructure effects of development are getting funded through this source? Is it a half? Is it 10%? Is it 90%? I'd just like to get a rough idea of how well it's doing the job.
It's difficult to say at this point. I don't have that information in front of me to give you an answer. I can certainly look into it and provide you with some clarity on that. But what I mentioned earlier is the work we're doing on the forthcoming local plan, the Dorset Council local plan, and the charging schedule that we're preparing for that. The evidence that we use to set the rates going forward, that information will be clear. The funding gap that we have to provide or meet will be established through work on the local plan. I could quote you where we were 6, 7, 8 years ago in the development of the charging schedules we operate now, but that's probably a little bit misleading. So maybe it's something for us to have a dialogue over, or I can report back on the progress of the new CIL charging schedule and give those sorts of facts going forward, because it is something that we have to look at.
Yeah, I think that would be good. I mean, it just seems to me that if you are collecting money for a purpose, it's quite important to know how far you're meeting the purpose. Thanks. That's all, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Heatley. Okay, can I move to Councillor Took, please?
Thank you, Chair. Couple of things. When East Dorset was a thing, East Dorset District Council, they used to take the SIL money themselves rather than give it to parish councils unless the parish had asked to have that money, and they would then spend that money in the local area, generally anyway. And I just wondered, when we're talking about some of the smaller parishes that don't have their own infrastructure perhaps to fund, whether Dorset Council could do something like that. One of the things town and parish councils might be able to do also with it is to spend money on maintenance, as I understand it. So if they've got a recreation ground, they can fund the maintenance of that ground from the SIL money. But finally, and probably more significantly, I'm interested in Appendix A on the report, where we've got the different areas and we have value of SIL available. And I was just wondering where that value for that. So for education, we've got 484,000 value of SIL available. For waste management, there's 80,000 in West area. I just wondered where those figures came from. We talk about expressions of interest in there, and I'm just wondering what exactly those expressions of interest actually are, and where those figures come from and how they're derived, because they're not, for me, intuitive numbers. So the first couple of comments, and then the third is the question, is really what Appendix A, could we have a little bit of help with understanding where the detail comes from? Thank you.
Mr. Gilpin.
Yeah, sure, no problem. Just to go through those comments. Yeah, again, referring to the report about monies that have gone to town and parish councils, just looking at the East Dorset area, the value of that is £320,000 has gone to town and parishes within the East Dorset area. Again, it's published on the website, and again, I can give you a direct link to that report. It'd be interesting. I'm not familiar with that arrangement, but that arrangement does exist. Town and parish councils can say to Dorset Council, can you deal with this money instead? And that may be something I need to look into a bit further to see what that legacy arrangement was. But as far as I'm aware, the monies that are shown on our website, the £320,000, has been passed over, and some, hopefully all of those town and parish councils are using that money effectively. You're right that it can be used to maintain infrastructure, and again, this is where SIL, the definition of infrastructure, is slightly different between Section 106 and SIL. So you can do more things with SIL. In essence, you can manage, maintain, monitor, improve, repair with SIL money. So maintenance is definitely something you can do there. The value available, what we started with is effectively totting up how much we received, how much of that proportion that Dorset Council had received, the 75 or 85% retained by Dorset Council, up to a fixed point in time, and that is money that is effectively ring fenced to a number of identified categories that were prescribed by the legacy councils. So that is the value of SIL that we had received at a point in time. We'd asked for expressions of interest on projects within those categories, and the process that we've gone through is to spend some of that money on projects within those categories, and what's shown in Appendix A is essentially a breakdown of that process from start to finish. What we started with, the opening balance, how many projects have come forward, what is the value of those projects, have any projects now subsequently not come forward, having drawn down money or having been awarded money, and what is the residual balance to then spend in a subsequent round. So that the values you described there is essentially the path from start to finish on the funding round that we've just undergone.
Okay, thank you. The part of the question was, where did in the different categories you've got a value of SIL available, what was the formula that derived that particular value? So why is there 484,000 for education, 242,000 for transport? Where have those
Okay.
They clearly haven't been plucked out of the air, so that they've come from the application of some rule.
So the predecessor councils had established their priorities for SIL spend, and in most cases they'd identified a fixed proportion of SIL to go against certain categories of infrastructure. And in East Dorset we had 3 or 4 categories of infrastructure with a fixed proportion. I don't have that in front of me, but again I can furnish that, and that is part of the governance paperwork from last year. So simply to answer your question, there is an established fixed proportion of SIL income going to a particular category, and that's how those figures have been established in the first place.
So those have been established by the predecessor councils as a proportion. So they want to spend 40% on this, 20% on
exactly. That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Took. So I don't have currently any other RTSs in the chat box. Mr. Galpin, at 10.3, I think, let me just scroll back through it. Yeah, Cabinet in January 21, as we know, committed to approximately 3 million of SIL for 37 projects. And I think to date, approximately 440,000 SIL expenditure has been helped to deliver those infrastructure projects. So I was just wondering, it's probably too early in the day, but are all those going to be deliverable? Are there any that are at risk?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the groups that have been looking at SIL that I've been working with through SIL have asked the same question, and one thing we're really keen to learn is progress with those projects. And what we've done recently is to contact each project lead and find out if they're on track with their estimated drawdown and delivery of the project. And so what I've provided in paragraph 10.11 in the table there is an up-to-date breakdown of how spend is expected to go forward in the next 3 to 4 years. So we are keeping very close scrutiny on the performance and delivery, and the term recycled there in our engaging with project leads. We've established that some projects aren't now going forward, either because the cost of the infrastructure is far greater than the award that they received, or there's no chance of delivery. So we have money that we're recycling, and again it's an ongoing process. We're continually engaging with those project leads, and they're engaging with us, and we're monitoring how they're performing.
Okay, so Mr. Selgren, probably a question for you then. Going forward with this, so ensure that we're getting the best use of the money and we're keeping things on track, would you be of opinion that it would be a regular thing to come back to scrutiny to keep an eye on those performance of those SIL spends?
Chairman, you find that useful. Just the other observation I make and reference the other substantive item on the agenda this morning. Your other option is to consider whether this is something that finds itself into the council's overall performance management framework and is effectively dealt with through that broader process. I think at this stage, Chairman, obviously still early days in the life of a new council. Perhaps we keep that open and under review. But I think the notion certainly there needs to be regular reporting back to members and to ensure that the SIL spend is made aware publicly. That's an important part of transparency of the process, which is why the scheme is constructed as it is. I think, as I said, Chairman, in terms of the detail of that, let's perhaps just keep an open mind at this stage. Principle absolutely sound. Exact method perhaps is something we continue to just reflect further upon and find the most efficient and effective way of doing that. Yeah,
thank you. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, thank you. Another question in terms of the overview committee that we're going to make the recommendations to through you, Mr. Selgren, and that was about the former predecessor councils with their areas of spend, and whether or not we have the ability to ask the overview committee to adjust and alter those arrangements now that local government reorganisation has taken place. And is that possible to do that for the round 2 of money that's being collected?
Given that's a policy matter, Chairman, that's certainly something you could ask the overview committee to consider. Could that be for the Chairman of his committee to determine how they would go about that if they were to go about it? But it certainly would seem to me, Chairman, it's an eminently sensible suggestion, and one that I'm sure that the chair of the overview committee would be very pleased to consider.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. I've got a question from Councillor Took.
Thanks, Chair. It's in the way of a follow-up to what I was asking about earlier. On Appendix A, you've got all the various areas with different categories, but I noticed that some of the categories are struck through. So East Purbeck area has got Dorset Heathland struck through, Poole Harbour Recreation struck through, East area has got Dorset Heathland struck through. And yet in the information immediately below that first table, there is a description for East Dorset where money to be spent on Dorset Heathlands, the recommended infrastructure areas, Dorset Heathlands, and then further down in Purbeck, you've got Dorset Heathlands and Purbeck, Poole Harbour. And I'm just wondering why those areas are struck through and what the money in the second table is there referring to. It's slightly confusing to me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Gilpin.
Okay, yeah, it's probably a presentation or a formatting issue, and I apologise on my part if it has been confusing. The areas which are struck through in the long table at the beginning of that appendix are the areas that or the categories that are could be regarded as out of scope, and we're not recommending that at this stage, but certainly, as I've alluded to in the report, there are some other mechanisms at play at the moment that deliver heathland mitigation, nitrate mitigation, Poole Harbour recreation mitigation, and what we're suggesting is that those could come out of scope in future rounds and be delivered and managed by bespoke processes that have the potential to react much more quickly to the needs of say land purchase and such like. So the reason why they're struck through is because they're categories effectively that could or may not be part of this SIL governance process going forward. What that doesn't mean is that we're saying no to using that money from round one, and the long table at the end of that appendix is simply reporting on the projects that have benefited or been awarded funding from round one, which is why you've got some heathland mitigation projects in there. So it's a bit of a subtlety between looking back and looking forward, and hopefully that explanation clears it up for you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Took. Yeah, I think there's something around that about concerns about timeframes and moving quickly enough on those areas of like Dorset Heathlands mitigation, isn't it, Mr. Gilpin?
Yeah, that's correct. You know, opportunities to invest in land to take it out of agricultural use is something that is quite commonplace as a mitigation strategy, and waiting for this governance process to kick in can be problematic in not being reactive enough to those opportunities. And when there are established governance arrangements that sit alongside this to deal with that, it seems sensible to divert the focus to those rather than get caught up in this process. It will still be reported to members, and it will still be reported to Cabinet, but in a much more reactive way.
Thank you. We've got Councillor Parks next, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Just going back to the comments regarding the sort of monitoring and ongoing monitoring of the SIL spend, and I totally agree it does need monitoring, but I just wonder whether that probably sits best under audit and governance rather than this committee.
Mr. Selgren.
Just reflecting on that question, Chairman. Can I just reflect on that further and come back to you? It's a good question. In fairness, it's a democratic services matters. I might just want to just confirm that with the monitoring officer, unless he's on the call this morning and in the meeting this morning wishes to comment. He is with us, Chairman.
Mr. Mayor.
Chairman, I don't think that this is a matter for the Audit and Governance Committee. It sounds more to be within your terms of reference. Certainly, the Audit and Governance Committee are more concerned in internal control mechanisms and process than they are in the outcomes.
Thank you.
If that makes sense.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Is that okay, Councillor Parks?
Yeah, more than happy there. It's good to get that clarified. Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, it is quite right. Thank you, Mr. Parks. Councillor Parks, sorry. Okay, Councillor Andrews.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Mine is just going back to the 15 and 25%. So when we push this recommendation to overview, can we take that out and give everybody 25%? Because the areas that the development is being put into are the areas that probably need the infrastructure spend, just as much as somebody who's got a neighbourhood plan. I'm just not happy about the 15 and 25%. I think it should be one level for everybody, whether they've got a neighbourhood plan or not.
Thank you, Councillor Andrews. Mr. Gilpin, before you answer that, I think I missed you. You requested to speak, I think, on the previous item, I think.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll cover both points. So just to say that we have a duty as part of the government regulations to report on what we do with Section 106 and SIL money. Again, these are part of the reforms that the government introduced back in September 2019, and we have to prepare what we call an infrastructure funding statement. That is prepared. We published our last one in December last year, but that is to be prepared by the end of each calendar year. So naturally, the officers involved with this will be preparing information on the performance of Section 106 and SIL on an annual basis and reporting on it in December each year, and maybe that may shape the way in which it's reported to members. Just a thought on that one. In terms of whether we depart from the 15 or 25% rule, I'm afraid we can't do that. That is simply the government regulations that we work within. They are fixed, and we don't have the discretion to change that arrangement, I'm afraid. As much as I appreciate it may not support some communities. I'm afraid we simply can't change that aspect of the approach.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gilpin. Councillor Andrews.
No, that's fine. That's fine, Chairman. But there's other ways around it, isn't there? So we can make sure that we speak to the right officers to make sure that they spend the 80% of what is contributions in the areas that the fund came from. Okay, that's fine.
Thank you, Councillor Roberts.
I think Andrew Gilpin has answered. I have a totally opposite view to Councillor Andrews, having been involved in the formation and successful delivery of 3 neighbourhood plans. Those parishes would be devastated to find that community engagement and work wasn't reflected in an additional amount of SIL. They certainly felt that the enormous amount of work which was done by the whole community in those parishes, it wasn't parish council led, and indeed one of the smaller ones that I was involved with at Askerswell, it's too small to have a parish council. The whole village took part. We often had, of the 140 residents, 45 of them at meetings, and they were very, very keen on the additional SIL. So a completely opposite view to Councillor Andrews.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Roberts. Yeah, I think neighbourhood plans are a bit like Marmite, aren't they? There are, of course, other substances you can spread on your toast as well. Okay.
Just one more point on that. Town and parish councils can work together on spending their proportions. So if you're a parish that doesn't have a lot of income or no income, you can engage with your neighbouring town and parish council to determine how they wish to spend their proportion. You may have a joint vision for a piece of infrastructure that benefits both areas, for example. So don't look at it singly as the entity of a single town and parish council. There is scope to look beyond the boundaries of town and parish councils and work collaboratively to, again, maximise the value of the contributions. Yeah,
and presumably authorities on the upper tier can do that as well across county borders, much as you said with the as I think it was Councillor Roberts who pointed out earlier in terms of the Poole Harbour, with the contributions being made surrounding that.
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Councillor Took.
I was going to ask almost the same question about working cross-border.
Okay.
Our nearest neighbours are probably in Hampshire, and that so perhaps working with Fordingbridge Town Council might be possible for our local community here. But I think that's just been answered with a positive yes, you can.
Okay, Mr. Gilpin.
Just to throw another acronym at you, we do an IFS to report on what we do. We also do an IDP to plan what we do in terms of infrastructure delivery. And that infrastructure delivery plan is something that we prepare alongside the local plan and informs both the charging schedule for SIL and the local plan. And it's a forecast really for what we need and what we need to fund through developer contributions. And in preparing that, we engage with neighbour authorities on what their needs are, so that we're not simply planning up to a border. We're looking beyond that and looking at the wider impacts of development, and particularly development that is close to the edge of our administrative area. So again, we do some work proactively to look at that and see how we can engage and work effectively with our neighbouring councils.
Thank you. Councillor Roberts.
Yes, it was just a quick one. Earlier on, it was mentioned that maintenance may be able to be funded from the retained SIL in parishes. I think perhaps some briefing to them, because I know that some would perhaps use the services of the town lengthsman more for some of the village maintenance if they felt that the SIL funding could pay for that, and there is a misconception. And even though I may suggest it, they're not really they would probably like it a little more definitively. So whether we can inform them slightly better, and I know John Selgren was talking about it's a constant engagement, but I think to enable the small rural parishes to use funding for maintenance of communal areas would be a great help to clarify for them.
Mr. Gilpin.
Yeah, as I said, we have prepared a guidance note, quite comprehensive sort of FAQs note, which we share every time we actually transfer funding, because some town and parish councils have only just received some funding because development that's still liable has only just taken place. Councillor Roberts, I'm more than happy to engage with any particular parish council that wishes to speak on this. Let me first share that guidance note with you and your parishes, and we'll get some feedback on that. And if there's any other questions that crop up, and we're more than happy to answer those for you.
That's really useful, because with some of these parishes there may only be a slight development every 2 or 3 years because they don't have a DDB, or it's outside the scope. So and the parish council members change in some of that time. So that briefing note would be very helpful for me. Thank you.
Sure. No problem.
Thank you, Councillor Roberts. Mr. Selgren, you wanted to speak?
Chairman, thank you. Just Councillor Roberts' question sparks another thought, actually, that obviously the DATPC, the umbrella organisation, county association for the town and parish councils, provides all that sort of support. I'm just wondering if one of the things that we might encourage them to do is actually to do some kind of good and best practice exchange. We know, in fact, and I think many on this call will be very well aware that our town and parish councils do talk to each other a lot, and that ability to share experience and best practice, I think, might be a helpful way of taking forward the suggestions that Councillor Roberts was making.
Thank you. Okay, members, I've got another question. Thank you, Councillor Roberts. I've got another questions in the chat bar. So, our recommendation is for the members to of the committee to scrutinise the civil governance arrangements as implemented and invite the executive director for place to recommend any proposed changes to overview committee before cabinet approval. So Ms Watson, I dare say, has been making notes. I've made a few myself as we've gone through, members. So I think the various recommendations that we could ask through the executive director for place, Mr John Selgren, to take to overview would be, could there be additional comms work with town and parish councils to go out into the communities to engage, making about a much more community engagement to drive that infrastructure that they want for their betterment within their communities, and also to review the scoring process. Do speak up if you don't agree with any of this. The new local plan, obviously the collection would be spent Dorset wide. The overview to re-evaluate the predecessors' areas of spend from the categories due to local government organisation having now taken place for round 2. Because if we take, and it's no criticism of say East Dorset, just picking East Dorset out, you would look at that table and say that it's possibly it could be more visionary than it is presently, with differing categories in there for that spend for the betterment of the residents within that area. And as we said, sales spend would benefit from a regular review on its performance, its spend, its delivery, and its value that is brought to the local communities. Potentially, that could be the performance tool. That may be a piece of work that maybe need to be done later, as Mr. Selgren has pointed out. It's early days yet to see how we're going to actually do that scrutiny piece on that, as whether it would be through the performance tool or another way. So I've also got the 15%, 25% arrangement will be withdrawn. I've written down here, but I think that was was brought up by Councillor Andrews as to whether that 15% and 25% arrangement, but I'm not sure we can actually change that. I can't remember. Mr. Galpin, could you just remind me?
Yeah, I'm afraid that's not within our gift to change that arrangement.
That's scrubbed. Yeah. Okay. So did the members have anything else that came to light to them to take to the overview committee through Mr. Selgren? So I've covered it all. Ms. Watson, did you come up with anything?
No, I think what I've got written down is what you've said, so nothing else from me.
Okay. I think the important bit is to look at those areas of spend by the predecessor councils now that we've had local government reorganisation, and I think there could be quite a big piece of work done on that to bring better value to the residents in how that SIL money is spent. Okay, are we all happy? Okay, I'll move on to
Chairman. If I might, just you do just insert for the record and for completeness.
Yeah,
so sorry, Chairman.
Yeah, I haven't got the actual wording for that, but it's those recommendations that I've read out as a minded to decision from the members of the committee to ask you as the executive director of place if you could take that to the overview committee on our behalf.
Thank you, Chairman. To confirm, I've heard all of the committee's discussion of this item carefully and heard your summary, and would be minded to take forward those recommendations as you summarise them at the end of the discussion, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Roll on the 19th of July, eh? Yeah. Okay. If I can move to agenda item 7. Performance scrutiny, a review of the relevant Dorset Council performance dashboard to inform the scrutiny committee's forward plan and identify items for deep dives. And we have a report by Mr. David Bonner.
Great, thank you very much, Chair. Good morning, everybody. So it's not a traditional report. We have developed a brand new interactive performance tool for the committee to make use of. So the purpose, or the article today, is really to run through that tool and then for the committee to highlight any particular items within the performance information within the tool that they would like to note or take further action against, or indeed just just to request further information around. So I will now share my screen and bring up the new tool. Okay. Hopefully you can see that now. Yeah. Chair, great, thank you very much. Right, so we have spent some time evolving the Dorset Council performance framework, and one aspect of that is obviously the scrutiny of performance. We have a traditional performance pyramid, and at the top of that pyramid, after the information flows from the bottom to the top in terms of performance, it gets scrutinised by this committee, and in particular this committee with reference to place and resources. There is another identical dashboard for the other scrutiny committee. So the focus today is really around the information for this particular committee and how the dashboard works and what it looks like. So on your screens at the moment, you'll see a Power BI front page. This is an internet-based tool, so there is a link that you would click on to bring you to this tool, and this is it's quite a powerful piece of software that enables you to look back at performance across the last 2 years. It provides trend information and graphs, commentary, actions, a whole raft of information that hopefully will provide a great deal of evidence through which this committee can really get under the skin of the council's performance and raise any pertinent questions or concerns. So without further ado, I will show you the tool. This is the front page. We have a number of buttons here. The monthly update, the RAG table. RAG stands for red, amber, green. So it's probably worth noting at this point that all of the performance framework is built on a red, amber, green basis. So items of performance are rated as red. So those are items that are underperforming or not where they need to be. Amber, which are items of concern. So there is a fear that they will go off track. And green are all of the items that are currently performing exactly as we would expect them to be performing. We also have an actions tracker. So any items that have been flagged as red or off track, we have actions for those and responsible officers and delivery dates to make sure that they come back into the green territory. So we refer to that as our path to green. And then this last button here is the 2020-21 dashboard. So appreciating that we are now in a new financial year, this particular dashboard contains the current financial year, but there is a link here to take you back and look at the past 12 months as well. When we get into the tool, I'll show you some of the analytics that enable you to see this year and last year's information together for ease and for better scrutiny of the performance. So bearing all of that in mind, we'll click on the monthly update. This is what the information looks like. I will walk you through it in a moment, but there's a whole lot of information here in metrics and data. From a governance perspective, it was felt that as the scrutiny committees are spaced out throughout the year, actually it was helpful, rather than bring members' reports that are a number of months out of date by the time they come to the scrutiny committee, quarterly reports, for example, this interactive tool allows the latest, most recent picture of performance information to be scrutinised at these meetings. So committee members will have access to this tool, which will be updated on a monthly basis. So by the time we come into this meeting, all members of the committee will have the latest position in terms of the performance relevant to this particular committee. So this is what it looks like. We have a number of buttons up here. We can filter our information by directorate, so we can look at the various directorates across the council. We use what's called a balanced scorecard approach for all of our performance reporting at the council. So we divide our metrics and our measures across broad categories. So we look at financial information, operational information, metrics relating to our people, our human relations, human HR information, and we also look at our customer metrics. So that's information coming from our customers and our service users. So we have those 4 broad categories. We also have some information on risks in here as well, and public health. So if I drop down there, you can see the various categories that you can look at. The last one there is transformation. So we also have information in this tool on our transformation projects, and this large box here is the most current place update in relation to the transformation project. So Scrutiny members will also get an update on transformation on a monthly basis. The reporting frequency box looks at annual, monthly and quarterly metrics. So it's quite often the case across our service areas that bits of information pop up at various points throughout the year. They're not all monthly metrics. Some of them are quarterly and some of them are annual. So the tool takes account of that. And again, Scrutiny members are able to click on one of these buttons and filter by the most recent ones of those particular metrics. I'm going to skip direction of travel. We'll come back to that in a moment. We have our RAG rating here, as I mentioned. Everything is divided down by red, amber, green. At the moment, there are no filters set. Everything is showing as all. And up here we have our period. So at the moment we're showing the May information. That's the most current information in the tool. And obviously we can't predict the future, but as these come online, you'll be able to select future months. And as I suggested, prior to April, you've got the full 12 months in the previous dashboard. So we'll stick with the latest information for a moment. There are no filters set at the moment. It's all on all. So if I scroll down the page, you'll be able to see the full set of metrics. There's quite a long list in here. Now, some of them don't have any information against them. Those will be ones that most likely report on a quarterly or annual basis, so are not yet updated. And some of the information that's currently flagged as green is not a cause for concern, so might not have as much information against them. I'll scroll up here and I will select our red metrics, because those are the ones that I would imagine the committee are most interested in seeing at the moment. So these are all the items that are currently off track. Right, so we will look at these in more depth in a moment, but just in terms of how the tool works, we have our months here. So we're looking at the May data, our scorecard principle. So those are the operational, HR, finance and customer metrics. Frequencies, so you can see these ones are reported on a monthly basis. There may be some annual and quarterly ones in there if they've popped up this month. The service across the council that these relate to. So the top one here, for example, relates to our legal services. The actual metric that we're looking at. So the top one there is the percentage of land charges processed on time. The RAG status, well, we know that that's red because we've just selected it. The direction of travel. So the direction of travel is looking at whether or not that metric is showing an improvement or is getting worse against where it needs to be. So this one is currently, top one is currently flagged as green. So that means that at the moment, although it's flagged as a problem, there is a sense that actually the situation is improving. And if I just scoot back up here to the filters and the bit that I missed out, this is the direction of travel box. So members also have the opportunity to have a look at all of the metrics that are improving, all of the metrics that haven't actually changed month on month, and the metrics that are currently getting worse. Because it may well be a situation that we have items that are currently flagged in the green territory, so where they need to be, but that they are getting worse. Likewise, we may have things that are not where they need to be, but indeed are improving. So that just adds some flavour to the conversation. And indeed, we may have some things that are not good and just continuously are not good and stay the same. So the ability to filter on that adds some flavour and depth to the analysis that the committee can complete in their discussions around what they would like some further information on and scrutinise in terms of the performance. So this column here provides you with this month's data. So at the moment we're looking at 6% on this top one. Provides the unit, it's a percentage. We've got the target, it's 100%. The commentary provides information directly from the service in the council outlining why that particular metric is not where it needs to be at the moment, what the problem is, what the underlying issues are. We then have an action column, the what are we doing about it? So something's not right. This column is, and what are we going to do about it? The status of that particular activity. So this top one is on track. We've got a problem. This is what we're doing about it. Currently that action is on track. Who is responsible in the council for delivering that particular action, and when that action will be finalised. So generally speaking, and this doesn't apply to all of the metrics, but as a rule of thumb and a principle, this would be your path to green. So by the time we get to the 31st of July 2021, we would expect that to have shown a significant improvement and hopefully move back into the right target area, so you turn back to green. Now that doesn't apply to everything, and some of the commentary will elaborate further on whether or not there are some steps to the process or multiple actions, but in principle that's how it works. You would have noticed whilst I was hovering that this is a relatively new evolution to the dashboarding. If you hover over the metric, the committee are able to see the trend line for that particular metric. So the dark blue bar shows last year at this time, and the light blue bar is the current situation or this year, and then the orange bar is the target. So you can see on the 1st of April there, the light blue bar is a lot lower than the dark blue bar. So we're not quite where we were at this point last year, and indeed we were under target last year and currently under target on this particular metric. So again, this enables committee to get a flavour of the trends on the graph, if we have seasonal peaks and troughs, if this is an expected dip in performance, and indeed whether or not we ever hit the target that we are supposed to be hitting, and if not, it allows the conversation around what do we need to do about that. So that was the reference I said earlier. If you don't want to go back and look at last year's dashboard, it's all in one place on these hovering graphs. I think we have a request to speak, Chair.
Sorry, I'll bring them at the end of the presentation.
Okay, that's fine. Okay. We have some performance charts as well. So these are divided down by operational for the corporate directorates, operational for the place directorates, our broad HR metrics, and then some of the indicators have a further breakdown. So again, without wishing to dwell too much on the mechanics of the dashboard, committee members are able to bring up the information in graphic form as well and look at trends for each of the metrics. These are drillable charts. So you can see last year's number in dark blue, this year's number in light blue. If I right click on that and drill through, I can go into some further detail and actually have a look at what happened in that month. So at that point, or at this point, things are flagged as amber. The direction of travel is not where it needs to be. We don't have any commentary on this particular item, probably because it's not yet red, but again, these are the kind of things that the committee can have a look at and ask for a bit more information on should they choose. Okay, just go back, and you can do that with all of these graphs. So if we go back to the overall update, the principle is the same on the other graphs as well. There's a great deal of information here for Scrutiny to be able to dip in, have a look at, drill down, understand the numbers and the background. I'm going to pause there, Chair, because I think that probably is sufficient in terms of the mechanics of the dashboard, if you're comfortable with that, and I can take some questions on it.
Thank you, Mr. Bonner. Yeah, that's quite a comprehensive presentation on that. As members will understand, I think that most of you have probably seen this dashboard now, and we are planning, I believe it has been agreed, that we will be bringing a members webinar to the council sometime fairly soon in order to get this out right across the members of the authority, because this is going to be a fantastic tool for members to be using to see how the authority is actually performing. Now, for us in Scrutiny, it's going to be our main tool in terms of our scrutiny of the authority on how the various different departments are performing. So it's going to be really important for us. So we'll have a further discussion about this when we come to the forward plan. As you'll see in the forward plan, I think we're bringing this. I think it's on a quarterly basis to scrutiny. I think, Mr. Bonner, yeah.
It's every other meeting, Chair. Yeah.
Every other meeting. Sorry, every other meeting. Yeah. So we'll be looking at this in some detail. Of course, I forgot we're bi-monthly, aren't we, with the meetings? Yeah. So I've got a question from Councillor Andrews.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It really interests me, this tool, as I know I've seen it before. Just going back to the legal services one, if you could highlight that one again for me, David.
This one
excellent.
Here. Yep.
Yeah, that's excellent. So on track for target date. What is the target? What are we on track to do? To have all land searches done within a month of inquiry, or that's what I'm struggling to understand. So I'm
So that's a very good question, Councillor. Under normal circumstances, it would be to deliver this particular action here. But I understand from the chair that this may be an item that you would like to do a bit more information on. So if you would mind holding that question momentarily, I think we're going to come to it in a moment.
We'll be discussing that in the forward plan, Councillor Andrews.
Okay, thank you. Okay,
thank you.
That's fine.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from members? No. Okay. I think the other thing that we would think about in terms of the webinar, Mr. Bonner, was a guide. If we could get some sort of guide together for members, because this is it is a massive piece of work. I believe I've got the portfolio holder in the meeting. I don't know if the portfolio holder just wants to make a comment, because the team that have been behind this have done a fantastic piece of work on this. It's been quite immense, really. Is Councillor Wolf in the meeting? Peter.
I am, Chair. As I put in the chat line, there's not much I can add.
Right.
Yes, I'm happy to hold a members' seminar and organise that. It may be that we need more than one, because there's a number of parts of this tool that are evolving, and I suspect it's the sort of thing that we need to have a seminar for people to use. Some people will achieve a high degree of competence, and some people will need to play with it, and then further seminars in order to improve their ability. I'm very, very happy to do that. I'm happy to have multiple seminars, and I'm happy for the information to be available so that you can have a discussion on any aspects at any meeting. I did hear the comment about every other meeting, but it doesn't stop you from looking at an individual point. And the only other thing I'd add, which is David Bonner and I talk at very regular intervals. What we're not going to do is we're not going to change the tool. Our primary concern is populating the tool and reporting on the data within the tool. However, there is one area that David and I agreed we need to work on, and we've called them tanker items, which are particularly large items that move at a very slow speed. And we need to have a mechanism to be able to detect even slow movement on the grounds that some items might take a year to turn around and move in the right direction. And we need to have some mechanism to make sure that even if the movement is small, it is either in the right direction or we understand how we're going to move into the right direction. Happy to take any questions, and I know that you've had a presentation and you've already said how pleased you are with it. It's an excellent tool, and I look forward to all of the committees using it in order to better understand our performance. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Wolf. So I've got Councillor Took.
Thanks, Chair. I don't want to get too technical, but I'm assuming Peter just referred to one of the priorities being building up the database. I'm assuming that this is a database in its own right, which is populated from live systems, or is it dedicated input, or it's then populated and then the BI tool sits on top of that database rather than look into live data. But it's how that database is actually built up. Is it from accumulation of tools, or is it input, or how's it happening?
If I can get David Bonner to just confirm my answer, but basically the business partners and the businesses are responsible for populating the responses in the metrics for their area. And my comment about data is as much to do with building up patterns over a period of time. So A, we haven't got a consistent pattern over a period of time, and B, there are some areas that are not as well populated in terms of detail as they should be, just because these things take time. Chair, could I ask you to ask David Bonner just to confirm what I've said or amplify it, please? Mr. Bonner?
Yep. Yes, thank you very much. I can absolutely confirm that. Thank you, Councillor Wharf. It is currently taken from the data flows from a multitude of different systems, Councillor Took, around the council into one place. So this is essentially, by its nature, a governance tool. So it's a performance framework. Locally, individual services will have their own systems, data, analytics in terms of their own local management of that. This is a council-wide tool that sucks that information out of those localized tools once a month, with commentary and associated actions for the purpose of these committee meetings and the wider performance discussions that happen around the governance framework. So it's at the moment it sits on its own data set taken from a multitude of other data sets.
And sorry,
Okay.
can I add just one point to further answer Councillor Took's very reasonable question? There are some directorates are responsible for putting their own data in. So when people say, oh, that's not right, the answer is that is what the directorate has reported on their performance, and directorates are not always reporting in as detailed way as they might do. So the level of detail of reporting is frankly a little inconsistent, but that's just because it's a new tool and does take some effort. So we're working on both the consistency and making sure that we get proper population. And the fact is, if you look at the details, there are some areas where there is an amber, and either the quality of the data in terms of the report on that amber is not good enough, or some of them don't have any data yet. It is improving and we're nearly there, but you know, I'm not in any way saying everything is populated and you could go anywhere and get a good answer to any question you might have. Again, I'd be grateful if David Bonner would confirm that is correct.
Absolutely, Councillor Wharf. That's completely correct. And I would suggest that at the moment we're in a process of embedment. So this is a new tool. It will take some months to become fully embedded and sort of socialised across the council. So we will evolve it. The business partners are working hard with the services to make sure that we up the quality of the information in the tool, and it improves month on month.
Thank you for that response. It's exactly what I was hoping to hear, because at the moment, clearly it has to be a non-live database and you're importing data. The council has got to get into the habit, and that's all. We've got to get the habit of putting that data in the right place at the right time. And as we do that, this tool will improve over the months and years, and it'll be excellent, I'm sure. But thank you for going where I was hoping you were going. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Took. Mr. Selgren, you wish to make a comment?
Chairman, thanks. Just I thought it might be helpful for members just to have a kind of directorate perspective, if you like, on Councillor Took's question and Councillor Ward from Mr. Bond's responses to that. So certainly that's a very accurate description of how that tool is being developed. I would observe, Chair, if I may, that in fairness to Dave and his team, this tool has been developed at considerable pace. We are moving this away in a way I've developed performance management systems in other councils, but this one has been more comprehensive and more rapidly developed than anything else I've seen previously. So it's a good piece of work, but as I think we're all recognising, it's work in progress. Just to pick up that point that Councillor Took raised in the question about the areas that need further work, that's where we've had quite a good solid push in the last month. In terms of how it works, and again, just to amplify what David said about the process, is so these are viewed at the various departmental management teams, and they're viewed at that level, which is primarily where the data input comes from, and then that cascades all the way up effectively to this level where you see this council wide, and we have the members' scrutiny of the process. But as both Councillor Wharf and Mr. Bonner have said, the data is provided by the director. I can confirm that we as a director own the words that are in there, and if they're not right, then we will work to correct those. And again, that's where actually we value the member scrutiny of this, just to make sure it is robust. I say we've put a lot of work in, particularly over the last couple of months, to ensure that the areas that hadn't been fully populated were now comprehensively populated. I certainly believe for the Place Directorate we're in a good place for that, but if members can identify the remaining holes, then I would generally value that feedback, because this is a tool that we want to work with Councillor Wolf and Mr Bonner to make sure really serves this council extremely well, so members do know and are able then to share with the wider public the performance of the council to ensure that we are on target and achieving the things that we need to.
Thank you. I've got a question myself, and that is in terms of the targets. We have those target lines where you want the performance to get to. Where do we derive those targets from? How do we get to that? That is the line that we want to get to.
It is, and there are a number of gaps in the system at the moment around targets. So targets are our big push at the moment to make sure that we get some quite rigorous targeting into the system. Councillor Wolf, would like to interject?
Well, I think Councillor Bartlett's question was more, how do the targets get arrived at? And they're arrived at by a relatively simple process. The Directorate are responsible for developing targets that must match the council plan. And then I have a meeting every month with the Cabinet where I review, and I review not only what the performance is, but whether the targets are reasonable, because there's always a possibility, not that our officers would do that they would set themselves easy targets to meet, which wouldn't be stretching and wouldn't help us achieve the objectives of our council plan. Again, that is something that I'd be very keen for you to be involved with, so you should not, in my view, not just question the performance, but whether the target represents a reasonable target, with the proviso that where we up targets, we need to take the pressure off elsewhere. So it's a little bit of a, you can't up every target, otherwise we'd just have everything at 100%. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Yeah, in a utopian world, as an authority like ours, we'd like to be delivering that gold standard, wouldn't we? That would be the aspiration for everyone. And I'm just wondering whether this tool, or as an aspect of this tool, or as we develop it further, and presumably it's an ongoing thing that we're going to be developing, whether there would then be the ability for us to measure ourselves against other similar authorities within the country.
That's certainly, sorry to interrupt you, Chairman, that's certainly one of the things I want us to be doing, what you might call at stage 2. Stage 1 is to try and get a sensible level of population, a sensible level of targets, and a sensible understanding of those within the scrutiny and the overview committees. I am already talking to a couple of other areas, and we are a long way ahead of most authorities in terms of this. So at the moment, I've not found another authority that I would sensibly compare in the state that we're currently in, but I should be looking, and I'm sure other authorities will catch us up. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Took?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, a lot of what I was going to ask is, I think has been answered. Just for confirmation, what I was going to ask was the data that we're looking at and the targets and all the rest of it. I was hoping that the answer was it's going to be within the remit of this committee, that we can challenge some of those figures. So if we look at something and say, this doesn't look right to me, either the target's wrong or the data doesn't look quite right, as a committee, we can challenge that. And I think the answer that came out from Peter's comments earlier and from his nodding head, I'm assuming I'm right. Thank you very much.
Yes, you are. Okay, do you have anything else to add, Mr. Bonner?
No, I completely concur with everything that's being said.
Okay, I've got no other questions at the moment in the chat bar. Anything further to add, Mr. Walsh, Councillor Walsh?
Oh, you've got yes, Mark Roberts.
Oh, beg your pardon, Councillor Roberts, and I did acknowledge it, didn't I, as well?
Yes.
Remiss of me.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
It was really to comment really on Peter Wolf's comment about targets. I mean, they should be aspirational, but they shouldn't be unachievable, because it's quite dispiriting for a team to be set a target that is almost impossible to reach. And I think it doesn't help anybody in terms of good practice to have a target that is absolutely impossible. So it's really just a warning to fellow councillor colleagues not to try to be too aspirational, but to be realistic in the target setting. It's also for our public persona, we need to be seen to be getting very close to targets rather than never achieving them.
Yeah, quite right. And I see the portfolio holder agrees with you as well. Okay, so there was a couple of points that have come up, which we're going to discuss when we get to the looking at the forward plan at agenda item 8, and those were the freedom of information reporting that's come through on the dashboard, and the subject access requests, and also obviously the land charges, which I think most members are aware that we do have something of an issue with land charges at the moment, and we're going to have a bit of a discussion around those when we get to that item 8 on the agenda forward plan, next one. So thank you ever so much, Mr. Bonner, for your presentation. Mr. Bonner did say previously in a review that we had of this, that in terms of this performance tool, go away and play with it, you can't break it, which did sound like something of a challenge. So I will issue that challenge to all of you as well, and no doubt the challenge will be laid down in the webinar when we finally have it. But it is a really exciting piece of work, and members are going to, I think, enjoy embracing it and looking at behind the scenes as to how the authority is doing. Okay, so on that basis, we'll move to agenda item 8.
Chair, I think Councillor Wharf has put an RTS in.
Councillor Wharf, sorry.
Chair, my broadband is being reinstalled. I have a fleet of Sky vehicles outside, so I'm going to be offline, so I won't be available to answer any questions about land charges. It is technically in my area, so I had a long chat with Jonathan Mayer, who has laid out a plan to address this, and he has used the words perfect storm with stamp duty, people being on furlough, and the housing market going berserk, etc. And there is a plan that he has in order to bring this back on track. But I'm not going to be around if you were to ask some detailed questions.
Okay, Mr. Mayor and myself had a meeting yesterday to discuss it. Yes. Oh,
great. So you probably know everything that I know on it, or probably more.
I know nothing. Thank you, Councillor Wolf. Thank you for your input.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, so if we move to agenda item 8, Place and Resources Scrutiny Committee forward plan. And as I say, before we get into the detail of discussing the 3 items that are coming forward on the dashboard, which is the freedom of information request, the subject access requests, and the land charges, I'm going to go to the monitoring officer, Mr. Jonathan Mayer, I believe wants to make a statement.
Chairman, would you like me to cover off the position on land charges first?
If you could, please, yes.
Yeah, so Chairman, this is an area in which I would welcome scrutiny. Land charges has been an area of concern for some time now. We've had searches running at between 2 and most of the time 3 times the level that we've experienced in the corresponding period in previous years. That's a product of the stamp duty land tax holiday and the artificial bubble that was caused in the housing market. And alongside that, we've been working with colleagues on the implementation of the new planning system. Sorry about that. And that has caused us some particular issues and resulted in a backlog of searches that has built up, and we're currently taking on average 55 working days to respond to searches as against a target of 10. So we're significantly below where we should be in terms of our performance. It feels like one of the tanker items actually that Councillor Wharf referred to, rather than that 31st July date that you saw in the performance reporting being realistic. I'm meeting the head of legal services and the land charges manager along with IT colleagues to work through some measures to resolve the position. Part of it is about the volumes that I mentioned. Part of it, though, is about one predecessor council in particular. It's the planning system does not talk to the systems in which information that we need to use to respond to searches is held, and that means that we're having to do a lot of manual checking of individual searches. That takes additional time, and we really need to get to a position where we have the full benefits of automation in responding to searches. And so that's the concentration of that meeting with the head of legal services, with the land charges manager, and with systems colleagues. But I would certainly welcome scrutiny by the committee to make sure that you are, I think, holding our feet to the fire over this.
Okay. Mr. Mayor, when do you envisage that we can actually bring that to scrutiny? Because obviously we've got the significant issue now, but in terms of our calendar of meetings, our next meeting isn't going to be until September.
Yeah, and I think realistically, we're not going to have anything positive to report to you, or a position that we could usefully scrutinise. I think before then, you could, if members were available, meet in August, but I think we would struggle to bring anything realistic to you in August.
Okay, thank you. I've got Councillor Andrews requested to speak.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So I'm just wondering, why is it different in the one former authority area and not in the others? I understand there's a system integration problem, so one system's not talking to the other, but is that not the same in the other areas, or has something been solved? Because I understand that kind of like it's a matter of they're counting in days rather than weeks, like that former West Dorset council area is performing. So yeah,
Chairman, I wasn't going to single out by name individual predecessor councils, but we did things in different ways in the predecessor councils. That's why we're moving to a single system now. But the systems that feed land charges, the information that we need to respond to searches, this is information that dates back to, I think we have to go back to 1971, and councils held their information in different sorts of databases. Some of it is still held as manual paper records in one predecessor area in particular, and we have to migrate that information into a system that is able to talk to the land charges system consistently and reliably, so that we get the benefits of automation. But different councils did do things in different ways, and they did hold information on different systems, and those systems talk to the new planning system more reliably in some cases than in others, and hence these manual checks that we're having to make.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Is that okay, Councillor Andrews?
Yeah, fine. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it is, as been said, it's an unfortunate consequence that the predecessor councils use different systems, and I know that in the SVPP and local government reorganisation, we were faced with a significant number of different data that being collected on different systems, and certainly bank accounts as well. I think it was 6 different bank accounts, and I think, as far as I'm aware, that Dorset Council have moved to the position that we're at now in terms of getting a lot of that information into one system, and the planning has worked really hard to try and get the one planning system. I'm just wondering whether, Mr. Mayor, whether there is the possibility to create additional resource in terms of speeding up the process with that predecessor authority to get that information transferred over.
Yeah, so Chairman, first of all, in terms of additional resource, we've put additional resource into the team who are actually doing the handling of searches day to day, and that's there's very little that you could see as positive in a pandemic. But one of the few positives is the work that we've done around our skills agency and the ability to transfer colleagues from one area where there's less pressure into another where there's more, and we've moved more colleagues into the day-to-day business answering searches. That causes pressure in terms of having to train people because it's not straightforward. It's not a straightforward thing to do. But yes, I will be talking to IT and systems colleagues around the resources that we need in order to get that big data migration done, because that's the tanker item, is actually getting all of that data into one reliable system that talks to the planning system, that enables us to automate searches and respond to them very much more quickly.
Thank you. Do you have any more questions from members? No. Okay, I think then, Mr. Mayor, we're going to have to. Oh, I've got Councillor Trite. Councillor Trite.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. It was a question on the upcoming meeting on the 21st of September. We've got an item on the Dorset Council consultation process explaining how Dorset Council conducts consultations. I just wanted to urge that we ensure that included in that is a rationale for differentials in the lengths of consultations. Those variations, which have been quite obvious to me and others in the last couple of years, have given rise to considerable surprise and confusion amongst not just councillors, but more importantly, among members of the public. So I'm simply urging that that matter of length of consultations is included in that report.
Thank you. Mr. Selgren, I guess we can take that into account when the report is written by the officers.
Indeed so, Chairman, yes.
Thank you. Councillor Heatley?
Yes, a very simple point on the searches. Obviously, only getting 6% of our searches done on time is a bad situation. But I really do think this is a case where the target is probably impossible. 100% seems pretty odd. Surely there are circumstances that arise that are just not within our control, and it should be a bit lower. That's all.
Chairman, that might be something you wish to address through the scrutiny exercise if we are coming back in September. Certainly looking at the correctness of the target is something that we could cover then.
Okay, thank you. So is there any other members that wish to speak about land charges? No. So I think that obviously we will need to put that on our forward plan for September. Because if there is a significant risk to the reputation of the authority, the situation we presently find ourselves in. And I think by then, Mr. Mayor, we could have an update on what additional resources has been put in to try and alleviate the issue that's occurred with the predecessor authority.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Members, you'll be aware that there was two other items that come up on the dashboard. I don't know if Mr. Bonner is still with us. One was on the freedom of information request, and the other was the subject access request. Mr. Bonner, I don't know if you have the ability just to give us a little bit more information on that through the dashboard.
I can certainly flag those up for you, Chair. Bear with me a moment.
Thank you.
Okay, so hopefully that is now on screen. So we've just covered off the these two, so the land charges items. Subject access request item is here. So at the moment we're at 55.56%. As I mentioned previously, the dark blue line is last year and the light blue line is the current year. So we're below where we were at this time last year, but you can see it's a little sporadic in terms of performance, and the information in the tool suggests that at the moment there's a backlog of subject access requests in children's services. I'll pause there, Chair.
Thank you. So members, are we of the view to put this on the forward plan? Are you happy to do that? Anyone?
I'd be happy to do that, Chairman.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, Mr. Bonner, the next one, please.
Okay, and the remaining item relates to freedom of information requests. So the overall Dorset Council figure is 77, just over 77% against our target of 90. That is being driven primarily by the two people directorates, mostly by Children's Services, where there is currently sitting at 46.6%. I just hover over this again. You can see that we're consistently just lower than our 90% target, but not a million miles away from where it needs to be. But if we hover over our people directorates, it's a little sporadic. So there are conversations going on at the moment just to look at how we might address that, what actions we might be able to put in place, and indeed some resourcing questions. So I will pause there in case Mr. Mayor would like to respond.
Yeah, I was going to bring Mr. Mayor in.
Yeah, so Chairman, just by way of background, I think members will have detected this. These are requests for information held by council services, and if we're dealing with subject access requests, those are primarily requests for information held by the people services. We administer those in the centre, and we support the directorates in responding to these requests. So that's why I'm talking about this, but it's actually a whole council target that we're talking about here, not particularly an assurance service target, though we are supporting teams in responding to these requests as quickly as they can.
Thank you. So if I don't have any dissent, members, I think we'll put those three items on the forward plan. Okay. Thank you. I've got another, there's an additional item to go on, which is the St Mary's acquisition from November 2021 to go on the forward plan, if members are of a mind to. I'm not sure if I've got an officer who's going to speak on that or not. I don't know if Mr. Selgren, Mr. Mayor, has got anything to say on that. But we have had a request that, as I say, the acquisition of St Mary's goes on our forward plan for November 2021, if members are happy with that. Okay. And the other item on this that you will remember, members.
Sorry, Chairman. Could I just go back on that and say, depending upon the scoping of that item, and what exactly you want to scrutinise, this might be one where you might wish to consider joint scrutiny with the other scrutiny committee. We have changed the constitution to enable you to hold a joint meeting with Councillor Taylor's committee. So that might be one that's worth exploring as a joint item, albeit perhaps having a holding place on your work programme at the moment.
Okay, Mr. Selgren.
Chairman, thank you. Just to pick up Mr. Mayor's point that just having clarity about what the particular focus of the scrutiny might be, because as Jonathan's indicated, it could range across the two directorates. So obviously from place we're providing support or provide support in terms of the physical process of the acquisition as an asset of the council. Clearly that was driven by a service need from our colleagues in children. So I think Mr. Mayor's advice to you around considering the exact nature of the scrutiny process, and therefore whether it's a single item on this committee because it's around the asset bit, or a single item on the people one because it's around the service issue, or so Mr. Mayor's indicating whether your scope is such that might range across both and you need a joint meeting.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I know that most members within the authority haven't had the opportunity to visit St Mary's yet, and it's not until you actually visit the asset that you really get your head around just the potential that that asset is going to provide in the future. And as I've already flagged up, as you know, to senior leadership team, I do have some concerns about a business plan coming forward for that whole site. I know there is a aspiration within the cabinet, within the leader, to actually get as many of the members of the council to St Mary's at a future date when it's safe to do so. We're allowed to under the COVID restrictions. And I think it's once members actually get onto the site and see the asset itself, then your mind then is open to the potentials that there are on that site. So I do have some concerns as a chairman of scrutiny to see some sort of business plan as to what we're going to do with that site, and even if it was a rough draft document of the potentials of what that site could bring forward. Mr. Selgren.
Might suggest, Chairman, it lies more with people. But I say, very happy to pick up with you outside the meeting. The area of discussion I'm simply to pick up with the Executive Director for People's Children's as to making sure that we provide you with the appropriate report and determine which committee it goes to, or indeed whether it does go through both.
Certainly. I've got Miss Watson wishes to speak.
Probably answered the question. Just to say, I think my understanding was there was going to be a report on the acquisition element coming to you as Place and Resources, with a later report next year to People and Health with regards to the service provision on the site. But I think it's probably a good idea for an early conversation, perhaps with yourself and officers and the chairman of People and Health, just to bottom out who's getting what and when.
Thank you. Yeah, that sounds a good idea. Did you have anything to add, Mr. Mayor, at this point?
No, thank you, Chairman. That sounds entirely right.
Thank you. Mr. Roberts? Sorry, Councillor Roberts.
Yeah, thank you.
Apologise.
I think it's been answered because I was unsure really that whether there was anything that this committee could look at other than the acquisition of the assets, because the programme is still under development and is really an overview committee rather than our committee. But if we're having a paper or a presentation on the purchase or acquisition of the asset, I can see that should come to us. But otherwise, I feel it's far too soon to be looking at any other programme.
Thank you. Mr. Selgren?
Chairman, an option for you, of course, is that you've asked for this committee to receive a regular update on the council's asset process, which I know is mainly focused on disposals, but nonetheless, if you minded, could I guess include an acquisition that would deal with the straightforward asset acquisition matter, which obviously would seem to be the one that members are keen to do quickly, because that decision that has been already taken and therefore is capable of being scrutinised as such. That would, having received that piece of information and members of this committee having had the opportunity to scrutinise the asset acquisition process, then where that debate might lead with this committee or indeed the other scrutiny committee, you could perhaps determine once you discuss that particular matter through that regular update report. But clearly that matter is something for your discretion, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. And that's disposal and repurposing.
I mean, if I may, I would mind take the broader view, because I think it's, in almost all cases, we're disposing of assets in the main as a council with a view to repurposing or provisioning or to recycle the capital that's realised into some other service purpose. So I don't think it's unreasonable. I perhaps just might be advisable for you and I to perhaps take a sounding with the portfolio holder, but it would certainly seem something that could come within the remit of your regular asset update report.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the last item on the section 8 is that we had members will remember we had a public question at our briefers meeting concerning the local transport plan LTP3, and we've got a response to that question, which I believe is going to be read out by Miss Watson.
Yes, Chairman, thank you. Obviously, you had a question raised by a member of the public at your last meeting on the 12th of May with regard to a lack of implementation plan for LTP3. At the time, it was noted that a response had been given previously by the portfolio holder, and that as such it was something that wouldn't be added further to at that point, but you could take the opportunity to review whether it was something you wanted to add to your forward plan when you considered your forward plan at your next meeting being today's meeting. So for the purpose of a bit more information, I'm just going to sort of re-provide the response that has previously been given by Councillor Ray Bryan, who is the portfolio holder for Highways, Travel and Environment. So his response, which he has given on a previous occasion, is as follows. A conscious decision was made to direct limited resources to the delivery of key activities to make real improvements to low carbon travel options in the county, rather than produce a further non-statutory report that does not provide direct public benefit. This decision was made in the context of knowing that work is already underway to create a new local transport plan, taking account of the changed context since it was produced by the legacy councils. While there is no implementation plan document for the current period, Dorset Council has continued to deliver schemes and improvements in line with the local transport plan, resulting in active travel, safety and low carbon schemes being delivered. Dorset Council also continues to maximise funding for low carbon and active travel through external funding opportunities. 2020-21 was not a standard year in terms of delivery because of the COVID-19 crisis, but 10 cycleway, footway and crossing schemes were constructed using our limited LTP funds. As portfolio holder, I approved the programme of improvement and maintenance schemes to be delivered on an annual basis. And the list of 2020-2021 improvement schemes delivered is as follows. A35 Sea Road South, East Road Bridport Cycleway, Broad Street Lyme Regis pedestrian crossing, Abbotsbury Road crossing east of Perth Street Weymouth, B3081 Shaftesbury Road, Newbury High Street Gillingham, B3081 Nerburg Way Gillingham, Waitrose Junction, signalisation and crossings, Ringwood Road crossing north of Glenmore Road, Ferndown, West Lane, Stowborough, footway to Primary School and Village Hall, Highbridge Business Park crossways, drainage, Institute Road, Swanage, footway improvements, B3069 Langton Matravers School build out. Chairman, that is the end of the response.
Thank you, Ms Watson. So, members, we need to have a discussion as to whether you believe that this needs to come to scrutiny and be put on the forward plan. Mr Selgren, are you able to offer any insight into how this would be scoped?
I mean, instead, I wonder if I could help.
Mr Mayor.
Because I think it's a very straightforward question. Is the issue that Mrs Sumler has raised, the lack of an implementation plan for LTP, thing that you're sufficiently concerned about as warranting time on your agenda, bearing in mind the answer that you heard from the portfolio holder, that this is a non-statutory report that he sees as providing no public benefit. So question, does that therefore warrant time in your forward work programme? Do you agree with him on that?
Members? I think from certainly the transport, the city transformation funding that's come forward, I think is providing huge benefit to that part of the Dorset Council. So I think in terms of certain aspects of the LTP3, I think we're meeting requirements, but do members have any view on it? Councillor Took.
Thank you, Chair. I certainly think that the local transport plan needs input from one of the committees of the council, at least, Whether it's scrutiny or overview, I'm not entirely sure. This is something that is going to be moving forward and developed, and it may be that overview would be better placed to have a first bite at it. But scrutiny certainly needs to be involved in some form or other. And I think that's about as much as I can say at the moment.
Councillor Andrews.
Sorry, I think John Shalgren wanted to come in first, Shane. No?
Sorry, Mr. Selgren.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Tuke's observation is actually very helpful in that sense, because certainly as we go into the new LTP round, then that would certainly feel much more like overview territory, and that is setting the new policy for the council. Perhaps the consideration for this committee might be to look back at the current LTP and to do two things: look at delivery against a regional objective, and secondly, the things that are perhaps residual weren't completed in the current round of the LTP cycle that members believe are of such priority that should be rolled forward into the forthcoming LTP. So that might be actually a very useful piece of scrutiny work, which could then inform the overview of the new LTP as Councillor Tuke has indicated.
Thank you. Councillor Andrews.
Yeah, well, what John Selgren has said and Councillor Tuke has said is taking the words right out of my mouth, so I'll leave it there. I agree with John, and I agree with Councillor Tuke that probably needs to go to overview, and we need to look at what hasn't been completed yet. Thank you.
Okay, so I think, Mr. Selgren, yes, we could scope a document on the LTP3, what has been delivered, and do a piece of work around that. Are you happy to do that?
Very pleased to do that and work with you, Chairman, just to define that brief and then to commission that piece of work for you.
Okay.
And obviously, perhaps the discussion outside of this committee would be the timing of that as well, which again I'm very happy to pick up with you subsequently.
Okay, thank you. So members, in terms of the forward plan, as you see laid out before you, it's starting to become populated now. Is there any comment that any member would like to make on the forward plan? Or are we content with the way it's looking at the moment? Okay.
Content, Chair.
Thank you. So if I move on to agenda item 9, the Cabinet forward plan and the recent decisions of Cabinet meetings. Does any member of the committee have a comment to make on the Cabinet forward plan and decision making? No, we're all content with that. Thank you. And I'll move to agenda item 10, urgent items. There are no urgent items. And I'll move to agenda item 11, exempt business, and there is no exempt business. So thank you, members of the committee, and thank you, members from outside the committee, for your input. Very much appreciated. Thank you ever so much to the officers for your input and for the reports that have been done. Hugely beneficial to the committee. And at 12:11, I will close the meeting. Thank you.